Ladies and gentlemen, Alderman Doug Chipman, Mayor of Clarence.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. To open proceedings tonight, I invite the General Manager to recite the Council prayer.
Thank you, Mayor. Almighty God, we humbly beseech Thee to vouchsafe Thy blessing upon this Council. Direct and prosper its deliberations to the advancement of Thy glory and the true welfare of the people of the City of Clarence. Amen.
Thank you, and I'd like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on tonight, and pay our respects to elders past and present. Also advise everyone here that the meeting is being recorded audio-visually, and it will be available on our website later this week. Thank you. Declare the meeting open and note that we have an apology from Alderman Edmonds. Actually, I think he's on approved leave. Item 2, confirmation of minutes as at the 3rd of February as circulated, be taken as read and confirmed. Thanks, Alderman Bromley. Second, Alderman Peers. Any comment on the minutes? Put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Mayor's communication. I'd like to table significant appointments that I had during the last 3 weeks since the last council meeting, and they will appear in the minutes. I don't think I need to speak to any of them at the moment. And moving on to item 4, that council notes the workshops conducted on the 11th and 17th of February and the agenda briefing on the 21st of February.
I'll move that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Van Berto, sorry. Second, Alderman Kennedy. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I refer to the Boulevard site update, and I understand a consultation in the immediate vicinity of the site has been undertaken. My question through you to Mr Nelson: have all the concerns of residents that have approached council and their comments and concerns been resolved?
Through you, Mr Mayor, thank you for the question. I'm not able to answer that. The consultation has been conducted by the developer, so their ability to address those issues is a matter for them at this stage.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I also refer to the South Arms Skate Park acoustic assessment. Are we seeking another consultant's report in relation to the acoustic, etc., and what are the costs of the project to date?
Through you, Mayor, in respect to a further report, we have a report which was discussed at the workshop on the 17th. There is no proposal for a further report, and in terms of costs, I think that matter was addressed at a previous council meeting. Mr Graham may be able to help.
Through Mr Mayor, yes, we provided a briefing to the Alderman on the costs. This was probably about, might have been 2 months ago. From memory, it was around $450,000 from memory, but I can provide that copy again to Alderman if they desire.
Any other discussion on this motion? I'll put the motion then that we note the workshops. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 5, declaration of interests of Alderman or close associate. Being none. Item 6, tabling of petitions. Are there any petitions? Item 7, public question time. Item 7.1, there is a question, 2 questions. Just pardon me for a moment. Mr James Mancy, in regard to development applications. The questions are actually in the minutes there. I'll give you an answer to those. For both questions, and they concern whether or not Aldermen have sufficient time to read the agenda papers, and secondly, whether Council should continue as a planning authority on larger applications. In answer to both questions, Council has not formed a view, and both activities are statutory processes, and the Government is currently conducting a review of local government legislation, and I encourage you to contact the Director of Local Government in regard to those matters that you raised. There's no item there. 7.4, questions from members of the public without notice. Are there any questions? Thank you. If you could come forward and state your name and address one by one, please.
My name's Joanne Marsh and I live at 32A King Street, Bellerive. On the 7th of November 2019, an on-site meeting to discuss my concerns regarding the stewardship of the Bellerive Beach Park area was attended by Ian Nelson and Ross Graham. My concerns were about obstruction of the shared pathway, non-replacement of trees and maintenance of existing trees. Interestingly, vision of the area I expressed concern about featured on a recent news item about Glenorchy, Launceston and Clarence's poor rating in its cumulative loss of trees. Rust damage, heavy vehicles damaging the surface of the park, general neglect of the undeveloped areas of the park and unsightly, noisy areas around the oval perimeter. My question is, now that more than 3 months have elapsed since our meeting, how and when does the Council intend to respond to my concerns?
Graham?
Through him, so I'll follow up to on that question in the coming week.
Thank you. I'll take the question on notice, Mrs. Marsh, and we'll get to you accordingly.
My name's Victor Marsh. I live at 32A King Street, Bellerive. I've got 2 brief questions. Is that right? Right. These are photos of cars parked in the caged areas of Kangaroo Bay Hotel side and the Boulevard side. My question is, when events such as the Crown Series, the Big Bash, AFL football and the Junior Soccer Clinic, along with the busy Christmas shopping period, happen, where are the cars going to go when these developments are underway?
Thank you. It deserves a complicated answer because there are a number of sites involved. We will provide that on notice as well.
No worries. Cool. Right. Second question. With the completion of the proposed developments of Rosny Hill, the Hotel and Hospitality School, the Boulevard Apartments, the upgrade of the Bellerive Yacht Club, the aged care facility at Wirksworth and the ongoing developments in Gordons Hill Road, along with all the other villas and apartments popping up all over Bellerive, how are the Clarence City Council ensuring that the Rosny sewage treatment plant can cope with the extra demand?
Do you wish to answer that?
Thank you. I will answer that. The extra demand will be dealt with in consultation with Taswater. Taswater is the service provider, and when we engage in development approvals for different developments, there is always consultation with Taswater in regard to those infrastructure items.
Oh, thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. One more.
Greg Ross from 31 Wellington Street in Richmond. Just one of the questions, I've actually just got two quick ones if you don't mind. One is, why does Clarence City Council not have a current applicable local area objective or desired future character statement?
This is in Richmond you're talking about?
This is in Richmond.
Mr Lovell, are you able to answer that off the moment, or...?
I would say that the council doesn't have one because it takes time to get around to do all the tasks that the council could do. However, there are a number of complementary studies that the council has done, such as the Richmond Townscape Study, the Richmond Cultural Resource Management Plan, and so on. So there has been a lot of investment in plans, but they are yet to be translated into a character study.
Thank you. And leading on to that is around this development in Richmond itself, the Richmond Bridge. So back in, it looks like 2010, there was a study on the Conservation Management Plan, the Department of Infrastructure, Energy and Resource. A lot of it does state about traffic hazards that will impact from back in 2010, and the vibration system, all that has recently supposed to be informed that hasn't been currently working, that a new one will be installed for a vibration system to monitor the bridge. From now till when will it be acceptable that a study can be used for monitoring what traffic's doing for the future?
Well, first of all, I have to point out that the bridge is managed by the state government.
Yes, which we have made contact with.
Happy to intercede on your behalf and inquire of them of what their plans are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We can take that note of that.
James Mancy, 39A Wellington Street, Richmond.
Before you move on, I note that you're down for a presentation.
Yes.
That will be the next item on the agenda.
Yep.
As opposed to a question. If it's a question about the planning matters that were being dealt with tonight, I'd need to point out that you're not in a position to ask questions about the planning matters tonight, that you're only able to make a deputation in that 3-minute slot.
Okay.
I'm sorry, that's the
fine.
regulations. Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I can have someone else ask that question though.
Well, yeah. Look, I'm sorry, that's the local government regulations. I can't go outside of those.
I'll ask someone else to ask the question then for me, please.
If it relates to...
Look, it's not a matter of getting someone else to ask it. It's a matter that we can't entertain questions on a planning authority matter tonight.
That's fine.
Yeah. He can make a statement which he has the opportunity to make under deputations.
It's a question.
Well,
We don't notice it is about the development.
I'm afraid I can't entertain it.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Well, one clarification.
Yes.
He is entitled to make a statement about.
He is, and he is booked in to do that under deputations.
I just wanted to make sure that he understood that.
Yeah, no, we're not depriving the opportunity to speak, that's for sure. He's entitled to do that. Thanks, James. Are there any more questions from members of the public without notice? In that case, we're now up to deputations and you may come forward for 3 minutes.
Okay, let's start again. My name's James Mancy of 39A Wellington Street, Richmond. My deputation today is in relation to the development application at 12 St John's Circle, 41 Wellington Street and 9 Prosses Road, Richmond.
Before you go on, I do need to point out to all the speakers that are only able to provide 3 minutes and the clock stopped while I'm making this statement.
Yep,
You
that's
haven't
fine.
started yet. And there will be a 30-second warning as well.
Yep, thank you. I represent the community as a whole and hold no personal objectives on this development other than what the community has voiced to me. I will, however, only touch on the issues relating to the Clarence City Council Interim Planning Scheme 2015. So one of our issues is stormwater. No consideration has been given either by the developer or the council on the impacts of stormwater and overland water flow downstream of the development area. No less than 13 properties and 3 undeveloped road reserves will be affected by the developed area's stormwater. Some works have been completed by the council, but the problem still hasn't been solved. From the state stormwater strategy, stormwater controls must be specifically addressed at the design phase of proposals. If not, it can both limit the opportunities available for effective stormwater management and increase the costs of achieving the required standards, which in this case would likely be the council if after the fact of approval. Further point to consider. From the IPS, Waterway and Coastal Protection Code, acceptable solution 4, development must involve no new stormwater discharge into a watercourse, wetland or lake. Neither council nor the developer has considered this, and it is a new discharge point into an unnamed watercourse of the Coal River. Performance criteria 4, development involving a new stormwater point discharge into a watercourse, wetland or lake must satisfy all of the following. Risk of erosion and sediment is minimised. More detail should be provided on the outflow design. Energy dissipators at a minimum should be installed on lot 32. And best practice from the State Stormwater Strategy 3.6.5, grass swales should be considered for the entire downstream system. 2 other considerations. Pedestrian safety on St John's Circle. There is no path. Why is this not included in the development application, like the eastern end of Wellington Street, as stipulated in council conditions to be paid by the developer? The staging progression has been changed by council. No matter how it is done, there's always a temporary cul-de-sac of some description given the style of development. Given some local knowledge, it is a no-brainer that construction traffic should not travel along St John's Circle given its current configuration. It is disappointing that planning staff seem to have misinterpreted some representations and often skimmed over them no matter of their significance. So on closing, our original objective was to limit the amount of lots and amount of dwellings, as the development does not fit well with the existing village character. Potentially 25% higher dwelling density than other areas of Richmond. Unfortunately, the interim planning scheme doesn't allow for this, and we all fear this will erode the values of the village with national significance. This development could have been an asset to the town, but unfortunately in the eyes of the residents, it will become just another development.
Thank you very much. I should have mentioned before, many people in this forum feel very strongly one way or the other about many applications that come. It is absolutely essential, as in a Parliament House of any description, that people can express their views without fear or favour. Would you please ensure that everyone gets a fair hearing without that fear or favour in the future, please? Thank you. If we could move on to the second speaker, Mr. Brett Davidson, I think.
This is nowhere near as long as James, but my name is Brett Davidson and I wish to address the Council on the proposed DA of St John's Circle, Cosgrove Drive, Wellington Street and Prosser's Road. Lorraine and I have lived in and worked in Richmond for 37 years. We've lived there, 35 we had business of service and just recently accommodation, tourism. Our family was raised there and they still live in the area. We've lodged two representations of the 54 in total, and we currently own the adjoining property, 37 Wellington Street. All the proposed stormwater from the development will cross my property, and there is 13 other blocks, and with the development of that area, they'll make 2 more blocks that will have stormwater cross over them. So it's if it doesn't meet the headway, it goes across their block onto the road, across 32 and into my block. Council Officer's Recommendation 17 Engineering 3A states that the subdivision being greater than 5 blocks does not comply and must adopt a sensitive design principle, i.e. stormwater infrastructure consistent with urban infill development. So on this point, I urge Aldermen to debate this aspect of the proposal. In the absence of a current stormwater model, I also urge Aldermen to move a motion to defer the decision until Clarence City Council have a stormwater management plan that covers the modelling of that area. 2013 upgrades to Wellington Street have still to be tested in a significant rain event. Thank you.
Thank you for your restraint. That concludes deputations by members of the public. Motions on notice. Alderman Mulder. And do we have a seconder, please? Alderman James, thank you. Alderman Mulder.
I will be fairly brief. The motion relates to council potentially acquiring or at least investigating the acquisition of portable video cameras in the area to deter antisocial behaviour in public places and report the cost of those to the council. Mr Mayor, the role we are in this chamber and in many of our planning applications consistently on the back foot in relation to antisocial behaviour. We simply don't, nor do the police have the resources to be patrolling all the hotspots as they arise, and quite often we rely on post investigations long after the events happened, and the result of that is that it just continues apace. Now, this isn't a silver bullet that's going to stop all that, but the modern technology means that you can have a camera placed in an area and relocated at different times, but that camera can stream live to a secure website, so that if someone does report some behaviour that shouldn't be occurring, or noises in those particular spots, then the police would be able to access that site and assist the responding officers to actually respond to the event. It also has the effect, of course, of deterring, because no one's quite sure where these cameras will be, so you have a deterrence effect. It's just another tool in the toolkit, and it's something that I think we should be on the front foot with, considering that it's many of the ratepayers' resources and assets that are subject to this behaviour. And the areas that it becomes particularly useful are, I think, things like graffiti control, illegal dumping, antisocial behaviour, the motorbikes that are roaring through all these places that no one ever catches them, but these are the ways that the hotspots could be dealt with. So I just commend the motion to council. I don't think we're not committing anything to it. We need to get a report as to its feasibility, and we need to get a report as to its costings, and those things need to be put into the motion. So I just ask council to endorse.
Alderman James.
Yes, thank you, Mr Chairman. And may I refer to the Clarence City Council quarterly report, in as much as that there is a reference to the vandalism and graffiti costs per quarter. And may I add that in the expenditure 2018-19, and this is across the city, there was 43,948 in that particular quarter that was incurred in relation to vandalism, or obviously undertaking repainting and also undertaking placement of broken glass, in particular in the Rosny Mall. Also in expenditure for the 1920 financial year and in the quarter of that particular financial year, an increase of this time 49,239 in relation to vandalism and graffiti across the city. The year to date in the 2019-20 was 70,104, and obviously there was an annual budget of 132,520. May I add also, Mr Chairman, there's been an increase in vandalism, particularly in the Rosny Bus Mall, and with 20 glass polymer panels that were broken year to date. Tas Police are aware of the issue, and of course it's Council's responsibility to fix the problem and repair the broken glass as and when it occurs. This motion is in relation to an officer's report. It's not necessarily addressing, well, it does in part, I believe, the Rosny Mall, but by receiving a report in relation to this, then in fact we can have a look at this and therefore determine as to whether or not we should proceed into the 2021 budget deliberations. I seek Council's support.
Thank you. Other speakers?
Look, it does have a cost impact in a sense of staff time and energies and effort. I I think it's a worthwhile investment of that time and effort. Working around cameras has been incredibly successful with the RID squads in New South Wales, and RID squads are something this council unanimously supported, and I appreciated the support from around the table last year on that matter. And I think that in finessing around this, and even if it's a catalyst to get prosecutions at other levels of law enforcement, is certainly worth investigating, let alone for the deterrent effect.
By Alderman Mulder.
Just on the question raised by Alderman Walker in relation to what was the time, we were informed of the briefing on the agenda briefing on Friday that time would be about half a day for one council staff, so I wouldn't have thought that was a huge impediment.
So the motion before the chair is Alderman Mulder's motion concerning a report on video surveillance. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Alderman Bromley.
Mr Mayor, I move the motion standing in my name.
Do we have a seconder, please? Alderman Kennedy, thank you.
Mr Mayor, as colleagues will know, development of Clarence's component of the future Tasmanian planning scheme has been a complex and time-consuming process, and rightly so. The planning scheme is a key driver to ensure Clarence remains a well-planned and livable city with appropriate services and supporting infrastructure that meets current and future demand. I'm sure we can all agree that we simply cannot afford to get this wrong. It is absolutely essential we get this 100% right and are best positioned for future growth in our city. At this time, Mr Mayor, it is appropriate to acknowledge the work, the many hundreds of hours of work by our Manager of City Planning, Mr Ross Lovell, and his team over the past years to get us to this point. It has not been a bed of roses, far from it. However, it is a testament to the professionalism of our planning department that we are now at this point. So, to Mr Lovell and other members of Council's Planning Department, thank you. As we know, Council endorsed the Clarence Draft Local Provision Schedule in May 2018, and on the 15th of January this year, the Tasmanian Planning Commission released this for the statutory 60-day time period for exhibition of public representations, which ends on the 17th of March. Mr Mayor, as outlined in the 3 dot points of this motion, the intent is for council planning staff to be available after normal business hours for a period of 2 weeks, beginning next Monday the 2nd of March and concluding on Friday the 13th of March, to meet with residents and ratepayers interested to learn more about and be part of the proposed changes to the city's planning scheme. In short, if passed this evening, this motion will provide the opportunity for interested Clarence ratepayers and residents wishing to learn more or discuss aspects of the draft local planning provision schedule to make an after-hours appointment with a member of Council's planning staff before the statutory 60-day exhibition and public representations period concludes on March 17. Mr Mayor, this is not, as it were, a new or unique approach for this council. In fact, as we were informed on Friday, the last time we undertook a planning scheme review in 2007, Council adopted a similar approach to community engagement. Mr Mayor, as planning schemes are often complex and play such an important role in our daily lives, it is fitting that all interested residents have the opportunity to engage with subject matter experts to learn more about the proposed changes and how these changes may impact them and their community. Mr Mayor, I thank colleagues for their consideration and seek their support.
Yeah, Alderman Bromley, Alderman Kennedy.
Just to commend Alderman Bromley on the motion, and I think it's very timely that this coincides with our community engagement policy being on the agenda tonight.
I would like to commend Alderman Bromley for bringing this motion to us this evening. I note that he picked up on a comment I made at the workshop on Monday about ensuring that our community actually have the skills to engage in this debate, the skills and the knowledge. In fact, I'd go one step further and urge our GM to consider notifying all those ratepayers who are negatively affected by the change in planning schemes, so that they're aware. That they're aware that this is going to affect them, because I think we find so often that people only become aware when they go to develop their property and find the rules have changed. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to help our community to engage in this debate.
Thank you. I'll reply, Alderman Bromley.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
So I'll put the motion that we indulge the community with that extra consultation. All those in favour? Against? Motion's carried. Moving on to reports from outside bodies. 10.1, the Copping Refuse Disposal Site Joint Authority. Alderman Walker.
We've had a meeting since the last council meeting, and I expect a report to follow shortly. We might even backdate the report from last.
Thank you. Tasmanian Water Corporation, there's nothing to report there. Greater Hobart Committee met Tuesday the 18th of February, and I'd like to table the meeting actions that arose from that meeting. Moving on to
None of us have seen it, but we, are in no position to ask many questions.
well, look, I'm happy to give you a quick synopsis of it.
I'm just for future reference. I don't have any questions.
It's like
circulate before the meeting.
Look, I take your point, but when we call for reports from outside bodies, we use the same procedure there. That's something we need to take into account, perhaps. Okay. But a brief summary: there was a meeting of the mayors, caucusing, if you like, before a meeting with the full committee involving the state government, and to us, the top priority was setting the strategic vision for the City of Hobart, and in the same way that Sydney did, set the strategic vision for Greater Sydney. Flowing out of that, the next action item would be a review of the regional strategy, the planning strategy, and the Strilis would then impact, of course, and be in consultation with the other southern councils, but the focus of this action would be on the 4 metropolitan areas themselves. And we were approached by National Seniors, you might have seen it in the paper, to provide free bus services. We undertook to discuss that with Metro. And the next meeting, 17th of March. Thank you. Alderman Blomley.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to table a copy of the Livingstone Community Activity Centre Management Committee report about a meeting held last Thursday, the 20th of February. I'd also like to mention in tabling this report, just to pass on the committee's thanks to the Group Manager Engineering Services, Mr Ross Graham, who attended. I think that we dealt with a number of issues there, and the committee greatly appreciated Mr Graham's time and assistance.
Thank you, Alderman Blomley. We do have reports also from Tracks and Trails Committee, Bicycle Advisory Committee and NRM and Grants Committee. We'll take those individually before we move on to other reports. Tracks and Trails Advisory Committee. Move the recommendation. Thank you. Seconded Alderman Kennedy. Are there any questions in regard to the Tracks and Trails Committee report? Put the motion that it be received. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Bicycle Advisory Committee, Alderman Newington. Yep. Seconded Alderman Blomley. Any comments on the Bicycle Advisory Committee?
Just briefly, I mean, when I get the opportunity, I suppose I'd like to acknowledge the efforts of the staff involved in these two committees. Russell Grierson in the bike side of things and Mary McParlin in the Tracks and Trails. They've done a great job over the last few years in coordinating the activities and putting together all the information that we see in these reports. And obviously there's other staff involved in that process too, from Ross down through the rest of the team. So I think we're really getting some things happening in that space, and I encourage my colleagues to help us do even more when it comes to the budget time. Because I think the provision of these sort of things in our community is a very important part of what we do as council. And there's some big things, and also I commend Alderman Warren in relation to the natural resources and the work that's being done in that space as well. We've got some really nice things happening. So, all good.
Thank you. Any other speakers on the Bicycle Advisory Committee? Put the motion that that report be received. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. And the NRM and Grants Committee, Alderman Warren.
As always, I'm proud to present this report and thank the officers for all the great work they do in this area. I commend the report.
Thank you. Seconded Alderman Peers. Any questions? Alderman von Bertho.
Yes. Through you, Mr Mayor, to the General Manager, is Council undertaking any redress action with the developer in relation to the lack of maintenance of the area adjacent to the 7 Mile Beach Lifestyle Village, which was mentioned in that report, that it was in very poor condition when it was handed over to council.
I might ask Mr Graham if he has an answer to that, otherwise we'll take it on notice. Thank you.
Any other discussion on that motion? Then we put the motion that the report be received. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. And other reports, Alderman Chong.
Can I table the minutes of the Youth Advisory Committee meeting, the Community Health Wellbeing Committee and the Richmond Advisory Committee meeting? And I've been asked on behalf of the Richmond Advisory Committee to particularly congratulate the work that's been done on the Richmond Reserve and how nice that looks and how much less dumping and problems we're getting there.
Good. Other reports to table? Okay, moving on to item 11.2, petitions. 11.2.1 is a petition in regard to 12 St John Circle, 9 Prosser Road and 41 Wellington Street that council...
Just on the matter, Mr Mayor, weekly briefing reports, did you fast over that without...
Yeah, we'll come back to that. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. I did overlook it. Thank you. I'll come back to that in a moment.
Thanks very much.
So the motion that I'm calling for now is 11.2.1 in dealing with the petition. If I could have a mover and a seconder, please. Thanks, Alderman Pearce. That council notes the report and we're dealing with it as a planning item. Thanks, Alderman Warren. Any discussion? Put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Now I'll go back to item 11.1, weekly briefing reports, that the information contained in the reports for the 3rd, 10th and 17th of February be noted. Thanks, Alderman Blomley. Seconder, Alderman Ewington. Alderman James.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. The weekly briefing report of the 17th of February 2020, and on page 15 of 15, regarding Ebony Slade and Adrian Hickey versus the Clarence City Council. In paragraph 2, it refers to, amongst other things, that the grounds of appeal are that the proposed development does not meet performance criteria clause F14.7.3b1. My question through you to Mr Lovell is, Mr Lovell, it doesn't actually summarise what performance criteria F14 etc. is. Could you just outline on the grounds on which that particular appeal is based?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I don't have the appeal documents in front of me, but I suspect what we've written in the briefing report is what the appeal was, all the grounds that were put. However, I can check that and provide further information separately.
We'll have to take it on notice. Thanks, Alderman Jones.
Through you, Mr Mayor, it's important that if there's a reference to the performance criteria, that in fact we know about it.
I think that's a good point you make.
And I was going to bring my copy of the planning scheme in tonight, but I thought Mr Lovell would have that anyway. Thank you.
Any other discussion in regard to the weekly briefing reports? I'll put the motion that the information in them be noted. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, I now like to advise that Council intends to sit as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. And the first item on the agenda is item 11.3.1, which is a development application at 25 Facility Court, Oakdowns. Thanks, Alderman Pearce. Seconded, Alderman Ewington. Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I really believe this is fairly straightforward. I think the objections here has been well answered by the officers, so I'm quite happy to support this recommendation.
Other speakers? No need for right to reply. So the recommendation is approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.2 is a development application at 2 Alma Street, Bellerive, for the demolition of existing building and existing toilet block. Thanks, Alderman Walker. Seconder, please. Alderman Ewington. Thank you. Alderman Walker.
Look, the report goes through issues line by line. It is recommended for acceptance, as well it should be, and I think there'll be many people at that school that will appreciate such a change.
Right, a reply. I'll put the motion that's approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously.
No.
Sorry, I missed that.
Against.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 11.3.3 is a development application at 12 St John's Circle, 9 Prosser Road and 1141 Wellington Street, Richmond for 43 residential blocks. Thanks, Alderman Newington. Do we have a seconder, please? Yeah, and before Alderman Blomley's a seconder, I do need to point out from Mr Lovell that under recommendation 3, which concerns staging, second line talks about lots 28 to 33. That should be 27 to 33, if you could please note that. That minor amendment. Alderman Newington.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Obviously this has generated a little bit of debate in the Richmond community, and obviously it has wider impacts for the whole of Clarence as well. You know, certainly Richmond has a unique charm about it, and that's something that we need to respect and pay attention to. You know, but over time, I mean, you could certainly say that Richmond has changed. I mean, there's certain aspects that, in terms of the heritage side of it, but you know, there's been quite a few residential changes over the years, and you know, people want to live there because it's obviously a nice place to live, and they like the amenity, and they like the semi-rural and the country life. And you know, this has been this development has been, you know, in the pipeline for a while. It's been, changes have occurred. You know, various zonings have happened to build towards this point, and I think that the you know, the demands there obviously for people who want to live in that area. I mean, some of the concerns that have been raised. Look, you know, if I read through the officer's report, I think, you know, it's quite clear that most of the things that are raised have been adequately dealt with in relation to the planning scheme, and that's really what we sit here to look at. I mean, issues about not wanting something to change or wanting to keep it a certain way, or whether the school can handle it, or whether public transport and all those sort of things, they're valid considerations, but they can't be brought in and take over a decision-making process like this one. We have to sit here and look at how this stacks up in relation to the planning scheme. And you know, the hoops that have been jumped through, and the work that's been done by the proponents, and the time that's been spent by our staff to review the whole process, the engineers, the designers, all that sort of stuff. I mean, I know what happens these days in relation to the work that goes into putting these forward, and I certainly encourage my fellow aldermen to support this proposal. I mean, we hear a lot of talk these days about housing affordability and those sort of issues, and I mean, that's one of the biggest things that can have an impact on the supply. The pricing is the supply that's out there, and this is not. It's certainly going to help. You know, this many houses means that someone will maybe move from another area into Richmond, and it opens up an opportunity for someone else in another place to you know, live the Australian dream and buy their own home. You know, I look at some of the objections and, you know, the concerns that people have. You know, I mean, the stormwater was raised tonight, but you know, according to the council report, you know, it's been studied and looked at, and the engineers are saying it's actually going to be better off than what it is currently. You know, public transport. I mean, you look at that sort of thing, and you know, public transport relies on volume of people being in an area, and the more people living there, hopefully that will, you know, produce better public transport outcomes for the local residents. Pedestrian public safety, I mean, all capacity local school, these are things that are going to be worked out over time. And I mean, schools grow and shrink, you know, every day or every year in different parts of the community, and that's something that certainly can be dealt with. You know, and I think, you know, overall, that, you know, what it brings to the local community in terms of extra people, which gives us a greater rate base to put into some of the infrastructure projects that the communities expect us to do these days. It's going to help us as a council to have the funds to be able to do those sort of things. And as long as we've got the, you know, we've done the work beforehand to plan it all out, which I believe that we have in this situation, I'd certainly encourage everyone to be supportive of this. You know, change is difficult for some people, and the people who don't want to see this happen have a right to put up their, you know, their objections and to make their feelings known. But I think the, you know, the fact that it's been through the assessment process, the staff have looked carefully at it. Like I said, there's been a lot of work done on it, and I just think it adds to, you know, it adds extra people to a place that's a pretty popular place to live. And I think that, you know, over time there'll be more work to be done to improve some of the things that are addressed in the submissions. But, you know, I certainly think, you know, it should be something we should all support and encourage. You know, we need people doing these sort of things in our city, and, you know, I encourage the rest of my aldermen to support this proposal.
Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Before us this evening, we have an application to create 43 residential lots in the township of Richmond. Now, as we all know, and as touched on by the mover tonight, there's been a significant amount of community interest in and consultation on this proposal. So I'd like to take this opportunity to place on the record my thanks to those residents who have taken the time to either meet with me in person or correspond verbally or via email to discuss this proposed development. Mr Mayor, from the outset, I also believe it's fitting to acknowledge the rich historical and cultural significance of Richmond. And as we heard earlier tonight, the township boasts one of the finest examples of Georgian architecture in Australia, and on an annual basis attracts over 150,000 tourists. In fact, along with Port Arthur, Cradle Mountain and Mona, Richmond is one of the state's premier tourist attractions, and as such, it is incumbent upon us to ensure that any planning decisions we make clearly emanate from and are supported by the planning scheme. Mr Mayor, as all of us who have visited the site in question well know, the land is zoned general residential with 2 further lots covered by the Historic Heritage Code and sits on grazed and heavily disturbed native vegetation. The site is located within an established urban residential area with surrounding rural land. The traffic impact assessment by Mr Pridanovic estimates that once the subdivision has been fully developed, there will be around an additional 38 vehicular movements per hour during peak traffic periods, which, in his expert opinion, will not create any adverse operational issues on the road network. And I note that TIA has been accepted by Council's development engineer. Existing overland stormwater flow will be piped underneath the new road, and we are advised on page 85 of our papers that Council's development and hydraulic engineers have reviewed the proposed stormwater treatment method and options available and are satisfied that overall stormwater quality will be improved as a result of the development. Further, as outlined on page 92, the proposed development, which includes overland flow provision, is considered to be sufficient to handle flows for up to an event of AUP 1%, which is in accordance with an ARI of 100 years and is therefore compliant with the acceptable solution, that is, the 1 in 100 year flood. Mr Mayor, in many respects, Richmond is the jewel in Clarence's crown, and I'm sure we'd all agree that historically significant built heritage such as the Richmond Bridge must be protected. However, in this instance, additional traffic movements generated by the subdivision and potential impact on the Richmond Bridge cannot, under the planning scheme, be given any determining weight. Mr Mayor, I am confident, based on the expert advice of our officers, that the proposed stormwater infrastructure and proposed density, as well as the public open space contribution, will ensure best outcomes for Richmond and our city. And it is for these reasons, Mr Mayor, that I support the officer's recommendation to approve the DA, subject to the comprehensive conditions and advice as outlined in our papers, and I urge colleagues to do likewise.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A residential development in this area will occur, and we must deal with what is proposed. We can't go inventing it or changing it or presenting something else. So the development needs to be right, and we're missing a few things here. We don't have a proper study, a traffic study or a plan in relation to the wider area networks. So you know, we're really desperate for that eastern bypass to be built if we're going to put any more traffic over the bridge or in Wellington Road, which is a rat run, of course, these days from Sorrel as they try to bypass the blockages on the highway. We have no stormwater planning with ponds and floods. So we can talk about 100-year floods, but talk to the people who have been inundated who haven't even been there 100 years but have been inundated more than once. So those are some of the things that need the data fishing. But when it comes to the actual specifics of this particular plan, I find the proposed Wellington Roadwork connection is unnecessary. It fails the Australian guidelines for sight distances for vehicles in a 50-kilometre zone. At 82 metres, the proposed Wellington Street connection fails the Austroad guidelines which require a 108-metre sight line to the south for vehicles stopped at the Prossett Street junction. All the assessments have been done for the traffic coming in, the view lines of the traffic coming out of Wellington Street. You put a junction there, a car stops at that junction, and Prosser Road, which is just 80 metres up the road, view is blocked. So that sight line from Prosser Road is failed by the creation of this particular junction. In terms of the 85 metres, the St John Circle Wellington Junction also fails the Austroad guidelines, sight distance of 108 metres. Although outside the current proposal, traffic on this increasingly busy road is already affected by inadequate sight lines. These are all planning matters. 55 connections, because they are covered in the Australian, in our Access and Parking Code, Code 6E, I think, 6E. 5 connections, there are excessive connections on 450 metres of Wellington Street, with at least 5 public streets and numerous private driveways and entries which already on this busy road. There are alternative ingresses and accesses available for this thing. There is enough road frontage with St John Circle, as the plans indicate, for ingress and egress. 9 Prosser Road has, I believe, adequate road frontage to allow for one-way traffic ingress, and the Brown Street, what's locally known as Brown Street, has adequate road frontage for traffic egress. Either of these could be used for emergency access or one-way access. The proposal, there are also some issues with the residential zone and the performance criteria, and also the stormwater management, but I'll allow other aldermen to speak to those. What I will do is I will foreshadow an alternative recommendation should council refuse this one.
Thanks, Alderman Wilder. Other speakers? Alderman James.
The proposal that's before council is in fact a number of stages, and the stages are listed on the council's meeting paper on page 66. So it's 43 residential lots and stages. So in other words, what we are dealing with tonight is the whole box and cadoodle. It's this plan that has been circulated as included within our documentation. So we're not dealing with just one section of us, we are dealing with the whole process of 43 lots, and that is part and parcel of what the recommendation the officers have put forward. Richmond is a beautiful place, it's already been said, and it's rich in culture and heritage, and Clarence has for many years regarded as the jewel in its crown. And for all those that attended that public meeting, and I know Alderman Chong, Alderman Mulder and Alderman Kennedy were present, to mention just a few, and they in fact heard what was being said by the residents in relation to this. There needs to be a watchful eye that I believe this council needs to keep in relation to what happens within the natural and also the cultural aspect of Richmond proper. The point that I would like to make are a number in relation to the residential zone, and they are that there has been a contrary, the proposal is contrary to the performance criteria P2, in that all lots must be considered capable of accommodating residential use with the building areas including rear boundary setbacks. However, lot number 36 doesn't meet that criteria, and it has not been addressed by the planner in relation to that. In the officer's report, he says all lots have met that rear lot setback, And in fact, they have not. Lot number 36 does not, and therefore it's contrary to the Clarendon's, Clarendon interim planning scheme. Also, Mr Mayor, there is a performance criteria 10.6.1, so that all lots must be considered capable of accommodating residential use with the building areas including the rear boundary setbacks. The Council has adopted no relevant network plan for the arrangement and construction of roads within the proposed subdivision, and that's in contrary to performance criteria P1 clause 10.6.2a. The proposal is contrary to performance criteria 10.6.2 as the development will impact on adjacent existing grid patterns, and this is part of the planning scheme, so we're talking about grid patterns and on the road streets and increasing connectivity between St John's Circle and Wellington Street through Council's road network. There are choke points in relation to this particular development, and that's St John's Circle and also at Wellington. My colleague Alderman Mulder made mention of that, which is part and parcel of the TIA which addresses this, and therefore it can be taken into consideration as part and parcel of Clarendon's Interim Planning Scheme 2015. Also too, the stormwater situation is quite apparent. You may recall, for those who were on council a couple of years ago, when the number of properties at 33, 35, 37 were flooded. And the properties are basically in the flow line of stormwater runoff from this proposed subdivision. There is nothing to say that that will not occur, given that there will be a concentration of stormwater from this development, and it goes to the lowest possible point, and that will be down through those properties and through that, well, stormwater overflow, which could not cater for it during those wet conditions some years ago, and it will happen again, and this will only make the matter worse in relation to this. Mr Mayor, we are very concerned about keeping Richmond as part and parcel of the crown in the council's jewellery box. It has to be said that what development occurs within that area ought to be more sustainable and in keeping with the area. 44 or 43 lots is too much. It's going to cram and compound the problem from a road network for a safety and pedestrian access, and also too, it will impact upon the stormwater problem, and there's no natural way in which council, and I believe, has been suitably qualified. I see council. I will not support the motion.
Are there any other speakers? Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, look, like the representatives tonight, I was concerned about the stormwater runoff, and Alderman James is quite right. Some of those places in Wellington Street did flood, and I think we were both up there talking to residents here. Now, I must say that I read the report, but I still wasn't completely satisfied, so I came and saw Mr Lovell to make sure I did have this understanding of the stormwater procedure, and I think he answered all my questions, and I've read the report, and as other aldermen have alluded to, page 85 of the report goes into in quite a bit of detail. Secondly, the road network. As we know, a lot of the road network is a bit congested, and a lot of that does come from Sorrel, and it's probably going to get worse over the next couple of years because of the work done at the airport roundabout. And but this at the moment, the subdivision's not there, and there's already people taking the shortcut through Sorrel. One thing that Alderman Mulder said, and I also raised it with Mr Lovell too, I'm not quite sure why there is at least a one-way entrance onto Prosser Road, because I think that would have alleviated a lot of that. Even a one-way entrance or exit would have also helped. Again, as everyone said, this is a beautiful area of Clarence. There's no risk on that. And I've had to think long and hard tonight how to go on this, because I did want to make that the stormwater especially was really up to scratch. And I must say I thank Mr Lovell for his time and his instruction on this.
Thanks, Alderman Pearce. Other speakers? Alderman Warren.
Thank
don't always listen to the prayer at the beginning of the meetings, but tonight a few words caught my attention, and that was urging us to make decisions for the true welfare of the people of Clarence. And I wonder how many of us, the aldermen at the table, the officers in the planning section, have actually stood at the corner of St John's Circle and Wellington Street at 8:30 a.m. in the morning, because that is the peak traffic period, and that intersection is already under considerable stress with school children, primary school children, commuters, farm people. Do we really want to take the risk of adding more traffic to that circle, that intersection? We don't yet have a traffic infrastructure plan for Richmond. I recall a meeting not too long back where we suspended a decision and waited for further action on a traffic infrastructure plan to make sure that we're doing this correctly and that we are looking after the welfare of the people of Clarence. So I have concerns that I think need to be addressed before we go forward with this.
To Alderman Kennedy.
Oh, thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I also have a number of concerns about this application. And as Alderman Newington stated, with many issues, when we sit as a planning authority, there's a number of them we can't take into consideration. But to be clear, this community has spoken about their many concerns to most of us, all of us in fact. And they include things like infrastructure capacity, the road network, associated traffic movements, 41 Wellington Street and the Historic Heritage Code, the accesses, as a number of people have touched on. I'd also like to touch on the stormwater. Again, I've spoken to a number of people that have been flooded in the past. It's had significant impact on those residents, and some works were undertaken in the upper catchment to minimise flooding, but this relies on the water being directed upstream away from this area. Now, this has not been tested yet and relies on regular maintenance of an earth wall structure. The state stormwater strategy states new developments should be designed to minimise impacts on stormwater quality. Now, while the developer may have planned a sufficient stormwater treatment for the area, no consideration has been given to properties downstream of the development area. It does fail on the amount of total nitrogen. This means the stormwater quality will exceed the required standards before it enters the Coal River. The application only takes into account the immediate area, but if you look at the whole of area that could be potentially impacted, this could become a real issue for council in the future. It's really important to get this right. It is one of the most spectacular places in our city. Please, let's get it right. I will not be supporting this motion.
I think Alderman Walker, you're indicating.
Just a question through you, Your Worship, to Mr Lovell. In the development application for 12 St John's Circle, 41 Wellington Street and 9 Prosses Road, it shows a footway leading to Prosses Road. What has happened to Brown Street, and what will happen to the access for 23, 25 and 29 Prosses Road respectively, considering the existing right-of-way and the perfectly formed road exists?
Through you, Mr Mayor, there's no change to anything outside the site other than required through the permit conditions on, for example, Wellington Street. So there's no change to Brougham Street, for example. I think that was the question.
Well, that's the answer. Yeah. Look, the decision isn't a rezoning of the land to allow for residential development. It's zoned for residential development. There is heritage components. So at some point in time, maybe as a result of this motion or perhaps something down the future, it is expected that there will be developments occurring on this large allotment. So the question for council is the application at scale and intensity adequately accounted for, given the unique challenges posed by the site? Now, I've noted the points about traffic and I won't repeat them. But just on stormwater, I mean, the area between the development application's boundary and Wellington Street include established residents that have been affected by stormwater. The most recent serious inundation between the Boundary and Wellington Street. That occurred in 2011. Now, a subsequent stormwater upgrade was a substantial component of the first budget that I took part of in 2012. But the area hasn't been challenged to anywhere near the same level of the 2011 event since, and you know, its capability isn't generally fully known. Because I did inspect the site of the culvert, which was the integral part of the upgrade, and this was only last month, and it was silted and it was filled with debris. In fact, it was to the point where water actually had to flow uphill to get to Wellington Street. Now, obviously, with enough water, it's going to get there, but when it's sloping the wrong way, that's a pretty bad portent. Deputations did note, you know, stormwater and overland flow as being a serious issue, and I think that's, you know, was well touched on by Alderman Kennedy. And then the other point was that, irrespective of the challenges that exist as far as dealing with water quality management issues and improvements that are made, the report makes it clear that the proposal does not comply with E7.71P2 water quality using the music model. The total projected nitrogen levels do not meet the required treatment target. That's stated. So putting all these components together, given the previous history of this area, particularly between the application boundary and Wellington Street, I'm not in a position to be able to support it.
Okay. Other speakers? Okay, so right of reply. Alderman Newington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, it just shows we have a diversity of views on some of the issues here, and that's good. I mean, everyone's entitled to put their position forward. I mean, and I'll just reiterate, I mean, some of the things that were raised today in relation to, you know, traffic plans. I mean, look, I don't think any community in the world would be able to sit back today and say they're happy with their traffic plan and their traffic management and their car parking and all those sort of things. And I mean, while, you know, some of the issues that are raised in relation to Richmond are outside our control in relation to, you know, connections through East Urban Highway or connections through the Tasman Highway through Sorell and all those sort of things. I mean, I'm confident that, you know, with the work that's being done at the state government level, a lot of those bigger issues that we don't have control over, hopefully will be dealt with. In relation to some of the, you know, more intense or, you know, more specific for the actual site, you know, I mean, the report talked about extra movements in the city or in the site being 38 an hour. Extra, which, you know, might sound a lot to some people, but you know, I think it's if it complies with what the scheme says, the impact it's going to have, and it's not excessive. Well, you know, I think that's you know, I take the advice of the officers there. The issue about the zoning, saying, well, it's going to happen at some stage. You know, I mean, like, as I said in the beginning, I mean, I know the work that has to go into getting these to this level. I mean, I think Alderman James was alluding to the fact is, you know, why do they have to ask for a plan that deals with it all now? Well, maybe Alderman James should try and go through a project like this and see what's involved in actually getting it to that point. And if you can knock it over in one hit and deal with it in one plan and get all the approvals, well, you'll take that every time. And, you know, I mean, I don't think that expecting developers to plan a couple of blocks and then see how that goes, and then another couple and then see how that goes, that's just not realistic to take that sort of approach. You know, I mean, the flood issue, I mean, look, floods do happen. I mean, if we get that scared to do anything because we think there's going to be a flood or we're going to be too scared to do anything, whether it's a flood, whether it's you know, fires, and, you know, they've certainly been in the news lately. You know, like, I put faith in our council staff in relation to looking at this proposal and coming up with a recommendation to approve it. You know, I mean, how many plans can we have on heritage issues, I mean, traffic issues, I mean, that sort of stuff, you know, and we all complain about the increased cost of living. That's where it all comes from, everyone. I mean, if we have to spend all our time planning it as a local authority and the state government are planning, that's why it takes so long to get things done these days, that I know we need to have plans, but I just think that they're sometimes used as a reason to not go ahead with sensible developments like this one, and you know, things that, you know, we all sit in this chamber and argue for, which is to make housing more affordable, to make it more accessible, and to give everyone an opportunity to have their own home. And I mean, I think we're just making it so difficult in some situations with putting up all these roadblocks and, you know, wanting it to be perfect. Now, I mean, yeah, I mean, there might be some obvious things.
Thanks, Alderman Newington. Need to put the vote.
That went quick.
So the recommendation is for approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? The motion is lost. Alderman Mulder. Would have been very helpful if this had been circulated beforehand.
Yes, Mr Mayor, but...
so we'll give everyone a chance to read it if you don't mind.
So I will certainly do that, provided that it come off the 5 minutes, I suppose. By way of explanation, Mr Mayor, all those points were touched on by the speakers.
Alderman Mulder, when you're ready, do we have a seconder? Thanks, Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As you can see from the all those points were touched on, and some even, shall we say, expanded upon by various speakers in the previous motion. As we've all said, as previously we've said, look, we keep bundling Richmond, we keep identifying it as something special, and then we keep treating it like it's a suburb like anyone else. Now, I know that's what the planning scheme does, and that some heritage overlays, but that normally relates to the existing construction of the environment. Now, the traffic plan, I mean, some mention was made in the previous debate about, no one's happy with the traffic plan in their area, and that's true. We all would like to see it done. But here we have a case where we have traffic problems, and now we're putting in a connection to Wellington Road to compound them. Now, we may not be happy with our traffic plan, but we know that there's no need to just charge out and unnecessarily make it worse. With the issues with the stormwater, they are possible, and it could be, but the point is made is not so much that the flow, because that can be organised, but there needs to be further work on the site to treat the water, to make it up to an acceptable standard to be discharged into Coal River, and it also needs to be expanded so that it can take the excessive volumes that occur from time to time. Talk of a 100-year flood doesn't mean that after you've had one, there'll be 100 years before you get another one. There's been plenty of 100-year events 3 years apart. So, we need it, and it's not that we can't do anything. What we need to do is we need proper infrastructure that actually manages a problem that we know will occur sooner or later. And that's what this one needs. This could have been conditioned that way, I say so, but I mean it's a bit hard for us to whack those conditions in after the event, after the planning's been thing, with the short period of time we have to deal with them. And in regards to the planning issues that Alderman James raised in relation to things, these things could really, these could be easily resolved if we didn't try to absolutely maximise the yield every time we get a development. There's been some good developments in here where the yield hasn't been maximised, and these are some of the best and brightest suburbs in which to live. I mean, I'll point you to Glebe Hill Estate where there's a massive amount of public open space and the yields weren't maximised, and it's a very open environment. If only the council would keep up its maintenance for the public open space. But all I do is I just simply say I don't think there's a need to go on and on and on. The points were raised in the previous thing. I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up in an appeal, and maybe we can get some of these things mediated to a point where most of us can be happy with what is actually goes in the community.
Yes, I'll be very brief, and again would support a proposal that in fact is perhaps more conducive to the area, not so many lots, and to avoid those checkpoints, which are choke points, which I mentioned earlier. The fact of the matter is that I was on the Richmond, delegate to the Richmond planning scheme when it was still coming across into councils and incorporated into councils' planning scheme back in the 90s. And I sat through a number of issues, and one of them was what we call acceptable development within that area in keeping with the natural heritage of the particular site. And given that this, I believe, is too much in an area where there can lead to problems in relation to traffic, safety, stormwater, and also to the fact that the rear setback does not meet the council's planning scheme, nor is there any road network which is conducive to the area, or a structural plan that would look at the long-term planning of the area. Until we get that right, I think that we need to be very careful of where we go with this, and I'm not anti-development, but I would be supportive of a smaller development which would take into consideration public open space, and in the particular matter that's before us, there's no public open space within that particular development. There's a cash in lieu requirement, which is sort of the easy way out if you take it for it doesn't provide public open space. So you've got a lot of activity. You have 43 lots in stages, which is part of this proposal, which was part of that proposal. And I would seek council support the recommendations before us in the spirit of the community's concern, and also for long-term planning in relation to the Richmond Township. I seek council support.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I can see, even though I supported the motion the first time, I think some of the concerns that Alderman Moulder have put in this are not bad. And I mean, look, if it does lead to mediation and get some of these things across, I think it's quite valid, because really, I mean, quite often we get a request for refusal, which really doesn't, I don't hold much hope for. But here, I think, you know, some of the things here, the sight line, the streets, that's one thing that did concern me. You know, the stormwater does concern me, and that's why I raised it with Mr Lovell before, because, you know, it's something there, as Alderman James mentioned before about Wellington Street. I mean, we went there when it was flooded. So if both parties can, if it does go to appeal, if both parties can sit down, I think some of these could be a win-win, because one of the things that Alderman Moulder and myself agreed with, I mean, there's Prosses Road, and there doesn't seem to be any way of traffic getting in or out that way. And I thought, to me, it makes a lot of sense to use that road. But anyway.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I find myself in a fairly invidious position in some ways. I mean, the reason I didn't support the original recommendation was predominantly around stormwater. And I angst listening to people about that, and I was there when it was flooded and remember all the excitement that engendered, and took the view, listening to the Alderman speaking, that probably it was sensible to refuse the motion because of that. I can't support this one, because a recommendation that says that you have to funnel all of the traffic through St John Circle, and listening to some of the concerns from Alderman Warren earlier, doesn't make any sense to me. I travel that road all the time. I come down Prosser Street Road, and I've sat for 10 minutes trying to get out onto Wellington Street. Trying to funnel everything through St John's, where the buses now go, where the schools are, where there's already a lot of traffic, just doesn't make any sense. And because that's all together, I'm not going to be able to support this either.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to clarify with Mr Lovell in relation to the sight lines issues here. I mean, the email that was circulated to us today. I know. Yeah, sorry. In relation to in relation to the sight lines and the distances, according to what was circulated, it seems like it all was okay. The sight lines at the intersections.
Through Mr Mayor, so in terms of the roads which have been changed as a result of the development, those two intersections, they meet the Ausroads guidelines. The existing intersection of St John's Circle, Wellington Street, doesn't meet current guidelines, but we're looking at improving that with the intersection works that's coming up through there and a removal of vegetation to maximise the sight lines. That's a legacy issue we're dealing with that one. It's as an existing condition, but we'll look at doing vegetation removal to maximise what sight lines we can achieve on that intersection.
In other words, the sight lines is not accurate. So, I said enough at the beginning. I mean, I just think that, I can't support this anyway. I just think we should be allowing people to get on with what they want to do and create houses for people to live in. Thank you.
Mr Mayor, thank you. Mr Mayor, before I begin, I'd like to just ask a question through you to Mr Lovell, and that is, have you, before this was dumped on us this evening, have you cited this refusal motion before tonight?
Through Mr Mayor, no.
So have any of your officers had any input into this motion at all? Through you, Mr Mayor.
Through Mr Mayor, I don't believe so.
All right. Well, Mr Mayor, that concerns me greatly. This is extraordinarily disappointing. It is a slippery slope. It is policy making on the run. Every other colleague in this place, if they have a refusal motion, they circulate it. They engage with colleagues. They don't come in here and ambush colleagues. Well, we've had one person already who didn't vote for the first motion say she won't be voting for this motion. So there's a likelihood that this one won't get up.
I must urge that you speak to the planning item, Alderman Blomley. I think I echo your sentiment when I first asked the question,
Mr. Mayor,
but it is important that we deal with the planning.
Mr Mayor, you're right, this is a planning item. It's extraordinarily important for everyone here tonight from Richmond. It's important for our city. It's important to get it right based on best expert advice.
And that's what.
And if we head, Mr Mayor, as we undoubtedly will to the tribunal, there's going to be costs. There's going to be lots of costs for our ratepayers. And I just have a real problem, Mr Mayor, with actions that I don't believe are honourable, and that put this council in a very, very dangerous position. I will not be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Alderman Blomley. Other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Through you, Mr Mayor, to the mover of the motion, I'm wondering, would consideration, that if you read point A, road network, there's dot point I, dot point II, and for II again, I presume II is meant to be III, which is alternative ingress and egress. Just through you to the motions mover, would you accept deletion of this last point within the road network component?
It's not a matter of debate, it's a matter of whether or not you accept it and the seconder does.
I'll say no, but I'll address the reasons why.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Von Berto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I won't be supporting this, and I won't be supporting it because for me it doesn't provide enough information, whereas we have an officer's report that has gone into each and every requirement within the planning scheme that is relevant to this matter and has actually given us valid reasons for why the officers have come to their recommendation. Already I'm concerned, and it's been brought up by another alderman, as to the issue in relation to the sight lines. We've been provided with very detailed information from the relevant manager in relation to sight distances, because that question was asked at our council meeting briefing on Friday, and he actually went away and provided us with a lot more detail, which actually makes it clear that the site distances are adequate in relation to Wellington Street and in relation to St John's Circle. I can't accept this particular alternative motion because it doesn't have detailed information for me to be able to make a considered decision. So I won't be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think what's become increasingly apparent, and once again, like everybody else, I appreciate the amount of work that's gone into this. However, when there's so much discussion around the table that's not really moving anywhere other than I think most of us agree that there's some problems with the stormwater, we all know that this land is going to be developed at some stage. We know that. So surely it is upon us to make sure that we get it right now to save everybody so many issues down the track. Thank you.
I've got a question, if I could. I'm not sure whether it's Mr Love or Mr Graham. Under the stormwater management on the tabled motion, it refers to the nitrogen does not meet the required treatment target. In what sense does that constitute a planning matter? I know it's cited in here and I know it's cited in the report, but I'm just wondering about the relevance of that particular...
Mr Mayor, I haven't seen the alternative motion put out. So under the planning scheme, the state stormwater strategy requires for developments to have 45% less total nitrogen following the development. The initial discussions with the developer, they were proposing not to do anything and they didn't achieve the required standards. What they're proposing to put in is 3 Hume sectors. That'll achieve about 35% reduction in total nitrogen. There's a couple other requirements in terms of total suspended solids and phosphorus, which their proposal does meet, but it was falling short of the 45%. It achieves about 35%. That's at the point of discharge at their property. Through the other open swales and everything, as it gets down to the Coal River Valley, there will be further reduction in total nitrogen as it gets further down. Nitrogen is difficult to remove in terms of a chemical. So I'd say the studies they've got at the moment is 35%, therefore it doesn't meet the 45%, and therefore, as the reports is stating, it doesn't meet the planning scheme requirements, which goes back to the state stormwater strategy.
So that's a 45% reduction on what's already going out?
Exactly, that's right.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Right to reply, Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just as an opening point, I don't appreciate being accused of being dishonourable. The other points that we need to make is that the sight lines, the report we got yesterday by email was as a result of questions that I asked at the agenda briefing. Nowhere have I said that I disagreed with those report findings. If you read the motion carefully and if you listen to what I said that at 82 metres the proposed Wellington Street connection fails the Austroads guidelines of 100 metres to the south for vehicles stopped at the Prosser Street junction. That sight line was not addressed by the traffic impact state assessment nor by the officer's response to the questions. Those two, they were related to the Wellington Street one. The St John's Circle Wellington Street junction fails the guidelines of 108 metres. So that is one where it actually does fail. In relation to the channeling all the traffic through St John's Circle, that was not what either I have put in this motion, nor what Alderman Pearce raised. The idea is that there would be an access and an egress across the road. Those connections exist. They would be one way due to the strength of that thing, and the proposed walkway is actually currently a road and it is within the development. Now, the residential zone and the stormwater, I think, have been adequately addressed. They are failures. So each of these points that I've raised are addressed by officers' reports. They are addressed by expert advice, and it's a question of, are we prepared to let this very important development slip through to the keeper, despite the expert advice saying it fails in a number of areas. So what I want to do, of course, is that I think, Mr Mayor, I would suggest that if we deal with A, B and C, that's the roads, the residential
Your Honour, right to reply, we need to address what you've tabled.
Yep. I'm just suggesting the way through is that we take, as a concluding remark, that we might take the decision seriously.
Look, I'm not in a position to be able to accept that because the motion that is before us is to either refuse it or accept it. It's a planning item. We can't take the planning aspects ad seriatim. So the motion is, as it's been put by Alderman Mulder.
Mr Mayor, well, in concluding, having made that statement, I'll simply say that it is not the intention to put all the traffic through St John's Circle. There are alternatives, and it is also on the stormwater issues. The expert advice is that it doesn't meet the standards. Well, if we can't meet the standards with a brand new development of this size, then we shouldn't be approving it. And in relation to the residential zone, that would be easily fixed if there was a slightly lower lot yield, but we can't do that in this motion. So therefore, we need to at least refuse it and hopefully get it resolved.
Thanks, Alderman Mulder. So the motion before the chair is refusal as outlined by Alderman Mulder. All those in favour? Against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The motion is lost. You can. I was going to say that if we can't deal with the matter, it goes as a deemed approval without any conditions to the tribunal. So I will accept a recommitment of the officer's recommendation.
I second that motion, Mr Mayor.
Do we wish to speak to it?
Mr Mayor, I just will reiterate all those points and hopefully we've given the residents of Richmond something to hang their hat on.
Thank you.
Mr Mayor, just to say that it's unfortunate the way the debate's unfolded this evening, and I just reiterate my point, the importance of engaging with colleagues with these sorts of important matters.
Look, you have made that point, and are there other speakers? Alderman James.
Yes, look, if this matter has been recommitted and it's the officer's recommendation, I believe it's inappropriate. The fact of the matter is that the motion that was originally put was lost and the second one was lost, and therefore normal procedure is that it ought not be recommitted.
Mr Nelson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The requirements under the legislation under LUPA require council to make a decision. Otherwise, Section 59 comes into play and council will meet the costs of every applicant in any appeal, and that will be significant.
It's also a precedent that we've set on numerous occasions in the past where council's deadlocked, that we have recommitted it. So well and truly tried pathway. Any other speakers?
Yes, well, if that's the case, then I'll continue, and because I challenged that particular question in relation to whether it would be recommitted or not. And since the chair has decided that, on the advice of the general manager, that it's been recommitted, I'll speak to the motion that's being put forward.
By all means.
And again, would say that the development has been considered by the community, and this council has to consider the matter that's before the chair on the planning considerations on Clarence interim planning scheme, as well as on the representations that have been made in relation to this. There has been consideration given as from those 45 residents, members of the community, that they are concerned about it. This council needs to listen to what they have to say, as well as take into account the fact that the number of considerations that have been considered and put forward by the officers do not meet the interim planning scheme, and they have basically worked through the performance criteria and found, and as we've said in this particular case, that it does not meet the number of allotments with the rear setbacks. It's contrary to that. There's also no structure plan for the long-term planning of Richmond. There are 43 lots that are being proposed in this particular case, all of which compounds the problem in relation to no public open space. In fact, there has been the cash in lieu required, so you've got this large mass of development without any public recreation or any other place for activity for the people in that particular area. It's being proposed as a complete project on stages, and therefore it's not in keeping with Richmond, and I believe that a smaller development would have been more appropriate, and also to the fact of the stormwater runoff, and it's been acknowledged by Mr Graham that it does not meet the 45% appropriate level. He has acknowledged that and said it doesn't meet that, so therefore it's contrary to the planning scheme as well. There is compound flooding that has occurred in relation to those properties at 3357, and that has not been addressed in relation to this. There are problems with this development, Mr Mayor, and it's contrary to the Clarence interim planning scheme, and that's been identified not only by the officer, Mr Graham, in relation to stormwater, but also in relation to the number of allotments which do not meet the rear setback. And finally, there is no public, or what we call a appropriate plan for the area. That has been acknowledged as not being done, and also there's no structure or road network design, and that is also being addressed in the acceptable solutions, and council has used a 2013 Ausroad sort of road plan to counter that the fact that council does not have a road design plan. That is contrary to the planning scheme, and therefore it's another issue as to why this particular project is contrary to the Clarence Council interim planning scheme of 2015. It's contrary to all those factors, and I believe this council is really taking this course down the process of where it will, if this particular motion is carried, will basically be found, I believe, by the tribunal to be contrary to the council's planning scheme. I will not support the recommendation.
Thank you, Alderman James. Other speakers? Right of reply, Alderman Mulder.
Yes, Mr Mayor, it's an unfortunate fact that here we have a plan, a proposal that fails the planning scheme. Unfortunately, we're in a position where we cannot go with no decision. So that is where we landed, and I don't think there's any point in hashing over it.
So the motion before the Chair is the officer's recommendation, which involves changing 28 in recommendation A3 to 27. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Moving on to item 11.3.4, a development application at 15 Howrah Road for visitor accommodation, 10 accommodation units. Thanks, Alderman Mulder. Seconded, Alderman Newington. Alderman Mulder.
Mayor, this is a development which, as we heard on the briefing notice, it's visitor accommodation, and if it were to be turned into residential, if its use were to be changed at a later date into residential accommodation, there would have to be some significant changes to the number of units. This is only permissible because it's visitor accommodation. So it does nothing about the housing stock for all the people in the city or the available rent accommodation. However, it is what it is, and I'm absolutely sure that it will be well patronised, and it will, for some time to come, will be a development at a particularly interesting spot in our city at the south end of Howrah Beach, and one no doubt that I will have an opportunity to see many times as it progresses. So I think it's a straightforward one. I don't think there are too many issues with it from a planning perspective, and we would welcome the development. And it's a nice thing to see that we have a little shopping centre there and that we get residential accommodation around it, because there's nothing better to deter antisocial behaviour than to have people living near your hospitals.
Alderman Newington.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I think the area at the moment is pretty untidy, to be honest. The removal of some of those poplar trees and creation of a bit of open space, a bit of sight line through to the beach, I think will enhance the area. The plans we've got coming forward, looking at the master plan for Little Howrah Beach and that area and access through to the beach, I think it'll stimulate us to get on with doing that. I mean, the access and the condition of that car park, hasn't changed in 40 plus years, and I think we really need to look at that, and that will make us sort of want to tidy up the space as well. And just as Alderman Mulder said, I think it certainly would be very popular. And it was interesting to note one of the apartments in the block on the other corner, the sign went up Saturday morning, had a sold sticker on it within 10 minutes. So it shows you how popular the area is. So I think I know it's visitor accommodation, not residential, but somewhere near the beach like that, that's where people want to be. So I think it'd be a great addition to the city.
Other speakers. Alderman Walker.
It's recommended for approval. It has been noted close on one side to light commercial activity, and on the other side of it, number 19 is quite a high density unit complex. It's been there for some time. I think I feel obliged to channel Alderman Edmonds and note that whilst it isn't residential accommodation, it is competing with Airbnb and will hopefully put downward pressure on the growth in that market. That's probably what he would suggest.
I'd reply. Put the motion, the officer's recommendation, approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. And that concludes our business as a planning authority. Next item on the agenda concerns governance. That the 11.7.1, a quarterly report to the 31st of December be received.
So,
thank you, Alderman Pearce. Second, Alderman Chong. Alderman Pearce, would you like to speak?
no questions, Mayor.
Nothing. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I refer to page 18 of the quarterly report and two aspects under management and staff resources. The Clarence Mountain Bike Park public toilets. Is Mr. Graham in a position to give us an update? I know it says in the preamble design specifications and tender documentation to a number of projects is outlined, but when I was chair of Tracks and Trails, this is one of our key projects, and I'm just wondering when we're going to get the actual physical structure on site. Perhaps he could, through the chair, actually give us an idea of when that may happen, or when it will happen.
Thanks, Mr. Graham.
I will provide a double check and do a briefing to Alderman, but I think it goes to legal review in March to then go out for quotation, but I will confirm with my staff.
On the same page, under Alma's Activity Centre redevelopment, Mr. Mayor, you'd be aware, as well as my colleagues would be aware, about a lack of quorum which occurred, I think, on two instances in relation to, I don't know whether it was a general meeting or it was the AGM. Having said that, is it an indication that the numbers at the Alma Centre are dropping? And if so, is it or will it have any impact on further redevelopment of the site? And perhaps my question could be addressed to Mr Nelson, but I couldn't address it to him on Friday because he wasn't there. But perhaps Mr Nelson may be able to give us an indication as to the numbers and whether or not this is a trend and therefore perhaps redevelopment of the site may be put on hold.
Thank you for the question, Alderman James.
Mr Toohey might be able to help on this.
Yeah, Mr Toohey's certainly got some more details. What I can say is that there was a discussion some time ago about Alma's and Harrow Rec Centre, and that question, I believe, was raised by Alderman Mulder, if my memory serves me correctly. And through the budget process, this current round, we will be talking to the Alderman about possible arrangements for both Alma's and the Harrow Recreation Centre in terms of managing those facilities. But there's certainly at this point in time no intention or direction to cease with the redevelopment activity. Mr Toohey's got some more details in relation to that.
Through you, Mr Mayor. This is scheduled for a workshop, I think, on the 2nd of March. At that workshop, we'll be presenting all the data in relation to the number of people who come through the centre, which is quite significant. That'll be the full business case for it. This is a follow-up from a previous workshop where we discussed the shortfall of funding and delivery on the total project.
Thanks, Mr Toohey.
Thank you.
Also on page 38, under water sampling, I refer to the appropriate officer in relation to the last sentence. A retest was taken from Little Howrah on the 5th of December, which was compliant, but due to the Christmas holiday, no resamples were taken after the failed samples on the 23rd of December. Through you, Mr Chairman, to the appropriate officer, can you just provide what's going to happen thereafter? Because there was a failure and therefore obviously something needs to be taken and done in relation to that sample on Little Howrah.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the reason why a follow-up resample wasn't taken is because the lapse in time. We have to use a NATA accredited lab and it closes over that Christmas period, so it's not possible to get their samples retested at that time. Usually the guidelines indicate that where a sample fails, we'll do a resample the following day, and if that also fails, then we'll put notification on the beach to indicate that recreational swimming is not recommended.
Okay. Finally, on page 81 of 86, the Clarence Aquatic Centre, I refer to total attendees for the period July 2019 to December 19 of 37,583, and interesting enough, the total attendees from July 18 to December 18 were 41,000. So in other words, there has been a drop of 9.9%. Is it possible, given that we have the figures for the last quarter in December 2019, for the December quarter ending 2018 to show those figures as to why there has been a drop of 10% in the number of attendees, and presumably there has been a drop in the number of in the income that has been that would have been achieved in the December 2018 quarter there ended. Is it possible to have that provided to us, please, in relation to those two periods of quarter ending?
Graham, can we get a report on that?
Through Mr Mayor, I'll track down that information to provide a briefing to the Alderman.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other? Alderman Ewington?
Well, actually, Alderman James beat me to that one because I've actually been. I mean, should I declare that I've got an interest in? I mean, look, I suppose the issue, the other issue I don't know is when are we due to review the operations of it in relation to health? And I know they've had a lease for a fair while. I don't know any of that, and I've sort of stayed out of it, but I'd be interested to see when that is up for renewal. But just to add to what Alderman James said, that figure of drop in numbers has been...
Alderman James, Alderman Newington has the floor.
Yes, but remember, he has a similar operation and it could be perceived as being competition.
Thank you. I'll take that as a procedural point, and Alderman Newington would be one to...
Yeah, well, so all I'm saying is that I've noticed that trend and it has happened in previous quarterly reports, and I'll be interested in finding out when that is up for renewal, because I don't know when it is.
I do need to point out that the business operations around that may, in fact,
when
cause
it
you a
comes to that
conflict of
time,
interest.
Mayor, I understand the situation and whether I can be involved or involved. I mean, look, as an alderman, I think I have a lot to ask the question.
I'll refer the matter to the GM for his considered advice,
Sure.
immediate advice, but it is something we need to take into account.
Sure.
Thank you. Alderman Blomley.
Mr Mayor, thank you. And I ordinarily would have asked these questions on Friday, but I'm sorry I had to depart early. I will declare in advance I don't have a conflict in either one of these. The first one is regarding the Bosnia Child Care Centre. The plans for the redevelopment of the outdoor area, I note that this is obviously for last quarter. Plans have been finalised. Have they been received? And that will be part of our budget consideration.
Mr. Tui.
Mr Mayor.
Through you, Mr Mayor. In terms of where it's at the moment, we're just waiting on the last bit of detailed design work, which is mainly to do with the stormwater treatment on the site. Once that's completed, which we expect to be done in the next 3 weeks, it then goes to our legal team to draw up tender documents, which will then go out for tender, and hopefully we'll get a good competitive price. In terms of the budget from that has already been budgeted for in this current financial year, and if the tenders that come in meet the expected expenditure, we should be right.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor, and Mr Tui, for that answer. The next question is regarding Sanford Oval and the GH&D feasibility study costing to supply water. Again, Council in the last quarter was awaiting a report from GH&D. Has that report been received?
Through you, Mr Mayor, we're still waiting on that report from GHD and we'll do a further follow-up, but we haven't received it to date. We are keen to obtain that report.
Thank you.
Other discussion, questions on the quarterly report? In that case, I'll put the motion that it be received. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.7.2 is the adoption of a council policy on memorials. Alderman Blomley, thank you. Seconder. Alderman Von Berto, why? I'm sorry.
You're having troubles tonight, Mr Mayor.
I'm having a bad time.
Mr Mayor, thank you. There's not much to be said here. It's a fairly straightforward policy. I had to deal with a similar situation at my place of work recently in arranging something like this. So I think this policy is comprehensive enough and provides a good parameters in which to operate in our city.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I agree. I think it's timely that we actually have some parameters around this particular matter. I think it will help aldermen when they're approached. So I support it.
Yeah. Other speakers? Alderman Pearce.
Mayor, you would think this would be quite simple, but one of my discussions with an officer today and Mr Graham, I'm a bit concerned that we don't ever have a time frame on this. I mean, I believe if a person's putting a plaque, we should know, and we could keep our records, how long that plaque's going to be there, because we have got costs incurred as by the report and our maintenance issue. And Scott here, council endeavour to retain memorials for as long as practicable, but approval is not a guarantee to retain in perpetuity. And to me, this is ridiculous. If I drop dead and someone puts a plaque there, I think council should know it's going to be there. They should pay for either 10 or 20 years and have it like that, because to me, you know, you're putting a plaque there, but how long is it going to be there for? We're stopping someone else that wants to put a plaque on something. I just think it's bad practice that the way we're doing it, without saying we want to park there, it's going to be there, we'd pay for either 10 or 20 years, something like that. Just to say you're going to put a park there and it could be there for 10 years if the structure that's on, say, a seat is not destroyed or whatever. And I just think there should be a time frame on it. And I just think, to me, this is bad policy because it doesn't have that with it. And to be perfectly honest, I'd rather just delay this, and if this is lost, I will delay. No, and I'm just saying, because talking to the officer today, he said, geez, I think that's a damn good idea. And I thought, well, yeah, I think it's a good idea too. So if it's lost, all I'm saying is, look, put a time span in it, let the officers do it because they're more professional, and bring it back in a meeting or two. That's all I'm saying. I could go on about the Cemetery Trust and tell you the reason why and everything else, but I won't.
Yes, look, I do want to commend the effort of officers to come to grips with a very challenging issue, and it is highly emotive for people, and I think when we've had this, trying to navigate through it has been hard with that in the absence. So formulating a policy is eminently sensible, and I think a good job has been done. Now, it was pointed out to us that this didn't come to a workshop before it's come here, and the reason being is the profound workload that staff are under. So I understand why that call was made, but I don't think it was the correct one. And if this motion isn't supported, I foreshadow a motion to defer this until...
I'd take a procedural motion off you right now.
That's lovely that you would, and one of the reasons why that could happen in any instant now, Your Worship, is that I have some concerns around the and again, this is what could be discussed in a workshop, you know, things like an individual or group that has significantly contributed to the cultural, social, economic and political aspects to Clarence community. Just sort of how that works out and the challenges around it when they're probably, you know, couples that are socially isolated that have perhaps been, you know, visiting the area for 60 years or those components. I just want to talk through and understand this a bit more because I think we might want to work on that a little bit more. And the other thing is perhaps thinking on the other side of it. It's quite eminently sensible that we can't have 150 seats between Bellreed Beach and Little Harrow Beach. I understand that, but there are a whole lot of areas where sponsorship of this in different places when we know things are upcoming could actually be a way to help families through their grief process, as well as subsidising the cost of infrastructure as well. So I move a motion that we defer this until a subsequent meeting, until after a workshop is held on the matter.
And I'll second it if it's...
it has to be foreshadowed now. You've taken the opportunity to speak on it. Well, you can't. Okay. Any other speakers? Alderman Mulder.
This is one of those ones where I do not think that we could have thousands of hours of workshops and we will never get our heads around the performance criteria, if you like, around when an individual group has significantly contributed to cultural, social or political life. Really, that is something that we'll have to let the officers use their own judgment on. So I'm not too sure that we can add any more detail around what is a policy. What you're talking about there, when you try to add that sort of detail and you try to get your head around those things, you're now no longer talking about a policy, you're talking about a procedural manual. So, and I don't think those things are capable of being spelled out in advance. I mean, what's significant, this year might not be significant next year. So, I mean, do it. There is a point though, and I think that some work needs to be done. Probably, we can adopt this policy, and then we can come and do some reviews and build some guidelines beneath the policy, which can address some of the issues such as, how long they stay there, and how long they stay. Where would be, the residence that person had in the political social life. So these are all questions of judgment, and it's not like we're talking about. Digging something out of the grave and moving them because we need the land, but it's some of it. So I'm not in favour of deferring this. I think I commend the officers. An awful lot of work's gone into this. They've obviously taken a lot of credence of other people and other organisations that have these sorts of policies, and I think that we should at least give our expert advisors a touch of common sense and not ask them to dig too far into the woods.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Ewing.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I have to agree with Alderman Morrill there. I mean, look, you know, we can have a bit of over-analysis and sometimes that slows us all down. I think this is a good start, but I think certainly there's some content and some detail that can be added to that. I mean, I thought that maybe having ongoing fees attached to the repair and maintenance might be something I think that should be in there. You know, it's one thing to put the infrastructure there in the first place if we maintain around it, but if it needs replacing, I think that is an issue we need to consider. And also, similar to what I mentioned at the workshop on Friday, that you know, there's other things that we could have in here that's not necessarily a memorial. I mean, just thinking about seats, I think we could expand some of the things that we would allow, whether it be sporting infrastructure, recreational infrastructure, that sort of stuff. But anyway, I think, you know, we should get the ball rolling, and over time I think we will certainly have an opportunity to have our 2 bobs worth where necessary.
Other speakers? Right to reply, Alderman Blomley?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
So the motion is that we adopt the policy. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. 11.7.3 is the council adopts the community engagement policy.
Yeah, look, I'll move that and by saying that we need to have a starting point. Okay.
Do we have a seconder, please? Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Alderman James.
Yeah, look, there's a number of things in there, and I could say it's verbose. It basically goes through chapter and verse in relation to a lot of the factors, and you know, ensure that all relevant information relating to engagement activities is available to the community to enable informed choices and decisions. You know, those sort of words. But look, at the end of the day, a lot of this information has sort of been, I suppose, plagiarised from other councils, or we've had the basis of where we needed to start with this and where we needed to go. It's got the consultation tools, and that's been a discussion in its own right over the years. So look, let's run with it. Let's give it a go. There has been obviously community consultation on this, and I did read a couple of the comments that were made in relation to this, and I couldn't help chuckling over them because I thought they are appropriate to be said, and so the expectation of what feedback we've had is in fact being perceived as being appropriate. So look, let's support it, let's give it a go. As I said, look, you might as well have every chapter and verse and every sort of dot point covered and followed through if that's the case. So let's give it a run, and always down the track, if there are certain things that come to light and we find that it needs to be, you know, reviewed or added to or subtracted from, then let's do it. So I see council support.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Other speakers?
I know that there's been some concern from the community that this policy is a step away from the participation policy of 2010. I've been part of the workshops as we developed this, and I don't think that fear is justified. I think this is very much a framework. It should be read in conjunction with the guidelines. It gives us all the tools that we need to do good community engagement. But what it does do is probably set the minimum standard, and I think it's up to us as a council to do more than that, to really do best practice community engagement using this range of tools that's been identified. And I think this commits us to doing exactly that, and so I will be supporting this motion.
Okay, Alderman Jones, no need for a right to reply. Thank you. The motion is we adopt the policy. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.7.4 is the City Heart Project. Thanks, Alderman Mulder. Second up, please. Alderman Ewing, thank you. Alderman Mulder.
For the second time in a week, I find myself once again recognising genuine community consultation. First was on Monday night when the developers for Griffith Point came before us and said that their method of consultation was not to come up with a plan and say, what do you think of this, but to go a step before that, to engage in the community in the development of the plan. And that's a great way of getting buy-in. You will never do the same. And this is what this one's doing too. We're not dropping a plan. We are moving forward to start to engage the community with what they would like their city heart to be. The city heart, of course, is on that map. But of course, you know, the city heart, that's just the council. There is also other land around the whole of Kangaroo Bay. In fact, the heart of the city is actually Kangaroo Bay. Unfortunately, that heart has a Chinese beat at the moment, but that's by the way. The thing that I would say, and this has been said in part of the ordinance, but just by the way, as we go in there, the important thing to me in a city heart plan is that we deal with the traffic movement. In other words, we try to get it so that it doesn't run clean through the traffic through the city heart, so that the city heart becomes, you know, 5 or 6 areas separated by major highways. So the fundamental part, I think, is the movement of traffic. I mean, identify the areas and what you want happening in those precincts, by all means, but just make sure that it's all based on a sensible traffic movement strategy that underpins it. So apart from that, I think, and I know that is part of the city heart thing, but I also think it's a foundational part, because once you've identified what you want to happen where, you've then got to work out safe and effective means for people to come and do it. And we don't want to go in a situation where we're closing and opening the Rosley Bus Mall, because we don't think it's a good idea that cars go through there, that buses go through there, and all those sorts of things. The people who use the other car parks don't like the fact that buses and cars are in there, but because we haven't really thought about this properly, we don't really have any other choice, and we're creating a dangerous situation. And I know there was a fatality there by the buses when someone backed over some of the bus. So the traffic is an important element of the plan, and I know it's included, but it is. I would just like to stress that it is important. So I certainly commend this approach. And I also note that we're taking $200 from our redevelopment of this place.
200,000.
What's 1,000?
What's 100,000?
It was 198,000.
That's right.
I appreciate the interjection, Mr. Mayor, because it makes sure that I'm accurate. So we're taking that money and we're turning away, because if there's one thing that comes out of the City Heart building is that this building is not fit for purpose, and no amount of renovation, no amount of lipstick on the pig will save it.
Yeah, Alderman Ewington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, thinking about the things that we've had in front of us in the last few months and the things that we know that are coming ahead, I think pretty exciting times on the Eastern Shore, and I think it's fantastic that we have given the GM the task to actually progress this project and make it happen. And I think, if you think about the hotel, the apartments in Kangaroo Bay, the CBD itself and the changes that are continually happening there, Tranmere, the proposals happening there, Rosley Hill, ferries, that sort of thing. And what I really look forward to is the fact that, we can create a place that can actually rival the Western Shore. We've always been the poor cousins of the city, and everything's been centred on the CBD in Hobart. And I think the opportunity for us to create a really vibrant, city heart with, the shops, which have always been there, but it's more the recreational space and the linkages with the other parts of the city, but also to, the hospitality side of things. I think that we've really missed out on here. We've really, you have to go to the Western Shore in most cases if you want to. You go out of a night and those sort of things, and I think to really take it to the next level through here with the opportunities that become available with the golf course, and engaging with the community. To expect we get everyone to agree, I think we're going to struggle. But I certainly think the community would, love the opportunity to do it, and I'm sure they'll be as excited by this process as what I am, because I think it's going to be a huge thing for our city with all these other things happening. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what we can come up with.
Yeah, look, it's interesting that the first paragraph in the recommendation has authorised the General Manager to initiate the project through community engagement. And I think sometimes we lose track of community engagement, and we've just spoken and addressed the council's community engagement. policy, and then in other instances we don't take any notice of it. You know, we don't listen to what the community is saying, and the numbers don't seem to matter. So look, having said that, it may be that the dot point 1, Roman numeral 1, is in fact a furphy, because in the end of the day, through community engagement, well, I don't think that's going to really matter, because this council has decided that it's going to go ahead with a lot of these projects which are mentioned within the City Heart project, namely Rosny Hill. Well, that's sort of outside it, but it was mentioned by the previous speaker. Secondly, in relation to the Kangaroo Bay, and it was mentioned also by a previous speaker in relation to the boulevard, okay, and how we're going to have ferries and everything like this. So it seems as though that's a fait accompli, because there's no community engagement coming from a number of the people around this place as far as that is concerned. My real concern about this is, okay, put it out to consultation, but at the end of the day, we've already got our blueprint, we've already got our framework of where we're going, and therefore it doesn't make one iota of a difference as to whether or not we seek community consultation in relation to this. The other factor that does come to mind is, in fact, the Rosny Golf Course. It's the only public golf course we have, and already around this place it has been said that they want to disregard, they want to get rid of the Rosny Golf Course, and even has been mentioned by, I won't mention the name of the person concerned, but there's been that question about having a convention centre and so on and so forth. Look, at the end of the day, we need to live within our means, and while I'm still in this place, and I'll be here for another 2.5 years and perhaps longer, because I'd like to think, I'd like to think that in fact we do engage and we do listen to the people, but at the moment we don't seem to be doing that, and this in this City Heart project encompasses those areas of which we haven't. And I think that by going out to consultation, it's part of the process, I suppose, of being seen to being consultative. But at the end of the day, it wouldn't make one iota of a difference if we have already established the concepts of what we're going to do with Rosny, Charles Hand Park, some new council chambers down the track. So look, I am in two minds about supporting this. Again, community engagement. I didn't support the motion that was moved earlier by Alderman Blomley. I'm just referring.
Focus on the issue rather than individuals.
Okay, yes, I am. Just let me finish, because in fact, the fact of community consultation and engagement here, I think, isn't part of the process. It's already been established where we're going with those 3 dot points on page 193. So look, I won't support it. I won't, even though it's got the word community engagement in there. But I believe that if people are going to view the video, will understand where I stand, given my standing on other issues, particularly in relation to the City Heart. So look, in summary, the dot points on 193 are quite clear. That's where we're going. We're going to look at a new council chambers. We've just thrown in that furphy about reallocating the 200,000 for the to the City Heart project, but the council relocation, or in fact the actual process of having a new council chambers, is embedded within those 3 dot points. So having said that, I will not support this recommendation.
Alderman Blomley.
Oh, Mr Mayor, I think I might have fallen down the rabbit hole. Goodness me. Excuse me, you've had your go.
You did have the
Yeah, he's had a fairly good go, Mr Mayor.
Look, Alderman, please keep
So, Mr Mayor, to the point that the previous speaker did touch on, we had an opportunity here earlier this evening at notice of motion, item 9.2 on our agenda, which wasn't unanimously supported. That was about community engagement, providing planning staff to be available. Wasn't unanimously supported, which in itself...
Alderman James.
Wasn't unanimously supported, Mr Mayor, which is very disappointing, because some people decided to well, Mr Mayor, seriously, the constant critiquing from the corner here is really unsettling and unseemly.
And it is indeed. Alderman James, please don't interrupt. Thank you.
You know, Mr. Mayor, we can't be all things to all people. We have a job here to engage with our community. The previous motion, the previous item we've dealt with, endorsed our community engagement policy, something we've workshopped and something we've signed on to. The General Manager and his team have put a great deal of work and thought into this proposal, the City Hub project. In fact, I don't mind sharing, Mr. Mayor, along with you, Alderman Chong, Alderman Von Vernon and Alderman Newington, we comprise... Beg your pardon? Mr. Mayor, it is really unseemly.
I didn't hear anything.
No, the constant chatter, it's just not on. Don't come in here and bully me, mate.
Alderman Blomley.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. I've just been told to be quiet. So I would like for Alderman...
She misunderstood.
Alderman James.
Alderman James, you have been warned by
I'd
me.
like an apology,
I now
Mr.
put you
Mayor.
on notice that if there's any further interruptions, I'm going to have to ask you...
It's been audio recorded, yes, fine.
Thank you.
I understand.
Thank you.
Okay.
Alderman Blomley, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I have to start again, actually. But Mr. Mayor, before us today is a very sound policy. The 5 members of the General Manager's recruitment panel, we, in developing all of that, this was something that we deemed important, recognising particularly that the council officers were not fit for purpose. They are not fit for purpose. We have a duty of care to our staff, and we also have a responsibility, I believe, to be fair dinkum about actually future-proofing the civic buildings of this great city of ours to ensure that we have something that we're proud of. I mean, if Devonport can do it, but goodness me, Clarence can certainly do it. So I certainly fully support the motion before the Chair this evening and congratulate the General Manager on the work he's done to date. And I look forward to working closely with the General Manager and all colleagues, Mr. Mayor, to ensure that this council, this city, gets the best possible result.
Sorry. Alderman Warren. Thank you, Alderman Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't share Alderman James' concerns about this just being a token exercise. I'm cautiously optimistic about this, and I think it embodies our community engagement policy that we've just accepted, because it genuinely is, I understand it, I hope I'm not proven wrong, going out to the community with a blank sheet and saying, what would you like? We have this land that is likely to be available. Here are some things that you might like to consider, like the council chambers. There might be other things that you've thought of that we haven't thought of. You might come back and tell us overwhelmingly that you want to keep a golf course. These are all possibilities. I believe it's a genuine consultation. I will be watching very closely to make sure that we are genuinely listening and keeping faith with our community on this particular issue. And in final closing, I'd make the point that while asides from aldermen are audible, you can't hear when people roll their eyes, and that happens quite frequently.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I'm incredibly excited about the City Heart because I actually had it as an election platform a few elections ago. So the concept of the City Heart, I totally agree with, and I am very, very pleased to see it coming, hopefully, to fruition sooner than later. And I very much like the idea that we are going out to the community. On a number of occasions, it has been said that we haven't actually consulted with the community about X, Y and Z. Here we are taking a key aspect of where we're going to go into the future to the community right from the very beginning. So I see this as a very exciting concept. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, I'd like to do what I can to allay Alderman James's fears, Your Worship. This isn't the achy breaky heart project, it is the city heart project. I just don't think he understands. Look, as if we don't actually do this, if we don't actually map it, then someone else will decide it, and it might not be in an environment that's conducive to the best result. It might be deemed that with housing challenges we need tower blocks on the golf course, etc. And for me, the golf course is the elephant in the room. The white elephant in the room is the idea of a convention centre, but I'll leave that for another time. That's a pretty spectacular piece of green space next to the state's biggest shopping mall. The juxtaposition is exquisite. We have the Rosny Barn that fortuitously is still with us and is at a stage of appropriate appreciation. So if we don't actually lay out some parameters around this space and get the community's feedback now, decisions will be made in the future, and they're unlikely to be done in an enlightened and considered approach. I accept there's a fair degree of community cynicism out there, and I guess that'll be priced into the process, but we will run through and we will get the opportunity to hear things, and I bet we get more than 39 responses around this survey. This is hopefully a legacy that this council can start the process for, and will probably be occurring with other councils. New chambers are something of that process, but I don't agree that Devonport's nosebleeding levels of debt necessarily are something we should aspire to, but I think that we'll have other ways to achieve those ends. So try and look long term, try and dial down the cynicism, and support this project, which is worthy of starting.
Thank you. Reply on Mulder.
In relation to a lot of our past activities, and I certainly don't grudge in that, but all I do is ask them to just park the cynicism born, no doubt, from experience for a little while, and see if we can do a little bit different this time, and who knows what ideas that we haven't preformed may arise. So, you know, I mean, one of the points that Alderman James made related to the council chambers, and that you know, the $200,000 being put aside, and implying that you know, that I wasn't in the you know, was somehow or other suggesting that we weren't going to do any work here, whereas in fact, you know, I'm fully cognisant of the fact, and I think I even made it in my opening remarks, that the $200,000 was a down payment because this building is not fit for purpose, and therefore, as part of this City Heart thing, we're either going to have to create some space in here or make someone in a neighbouring building an offer they can't refuse. So the idea of a new council chambers is certainly not off the record, and certainly would be I would think, a significant part of the City Heart. References have been made to Devonport and how if they can do it, surely we can do it. Devonport, of course, was the beneficiary of being in a marginal electorate and picked up something like $70 or $80 million from state government, and in the same time they still, you know, have got a nose-bleeding levels of debt, as another alderman mentioned. So, you know, just because Devonport did it doesn't mean we can do it, and it doesn't mean that you know, we're going to do it without putting a hand up. So, you know, it's an ambitious project. There's no doubt about that. And a lot of the dreams and things that people may have for it, or that we may have for it, may just not come into reality. But at least we'll have set the thing in process, and at least there'll be an overarching framework into which those things can come along when the time is more opportune. So, you know, I think, as I said in my opening remarks, and responding to my own comment, I just draw your attention back to the fact that this is the second time in a week where we have got a consultation mechanism that doesn't have attached to it a proposal.
Thank you. So the motion for the chair is we authorise the GM to initiate the project and allocates $200,000 from the redesign of the council chambers. All those in favour? Against? motion is carried. Moving on to item 12, Alderman's question time, and I think it might be Alderman Warren's turn. Alderman James.
Yeah, well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Recently, I received, and I believe another number of colleagues received, a complaint from a resident near the Bellerive Oval regarding an activity that started at 7 a.m. when in fact the permit was for a 7:30 a.m. start. My question through you to either Mr. Nelson, or I think we might be running out of questions for Mr. Graham. So
well, if you ask me the question, I'll allocate it.
Well,
what's the question, please?
You heard the question. You want me to repeat it?
Yes, please.
I'm sure we all received.
No, that's not a question. That's a statement.
Yes, okay. Look, there has been a complaint from a resident, Bellerive Oval, regarding the starting time of an activity at 7 a.m. when in fact the permit was for 7:30.
Right.
What action is going to be taken in relation to that? Because that person is not the only person who has actually raised a question in relation to activities and the time start. So perhaps Mr. Nelson could answer the question.
No, I'm going to actually ask Mr. Toohey if he's got a response.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will investigate it this week. We have also received a similar complaint as officers, and we've already started the investigation this afternoon.
Would that be
I'll report back on it once it's completed.
Thank you. Now, the second question is in relation to the security fence in the Anzac Park area, and in fact, when is it going to happen?
Mr. Mayor, we're still waiting for the Aboriginal assessment report to come back to us. I did ask for signage to be installed. I'm not sure if that has been installed, but I can follow up on that item.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to know, are all the permit conditions and licence requirements for the Arm End pipeline going to be met by the developer before the expected start date of mid to late March for the work to install the pipe?
I actually received an email from Craig Ferguson today, late this afternoon, indicating that he won't make it by March. He may still make it before the end of before the starting of the spotted handfish breeding season. If he can't make that start date, it'll be November sometime before he starts it. I'm happy to circulate that email.
And my second question is, has the developer approached council for a contribution to funding the installation of the pipeline? And if so, what advice has been given to the developer and the alderman?
It was raised obliquely in the workshop that was conducted, the last workshop that he attended, and I think the message he got was, don't waste your time asking council. Apart from that, I'm not aware of any approach to us at all.
Neither am
I. Yep.
Mr. Blomley. Alderman Blomley, sorry.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I know we've moved on to 12.4 questions about notice. I seem to have skipped over 12.1 questions on notice, but I have one listed.
Oh, you did too?
So I'm happy to have that response in written form emailed to me or given to me.
Look, I will ask the General Manager to give you that response.
All right, thank you. And I'm happy, it doesn't have to be verbally now. Just
all right, we'll take it as ready if you
Thank you. So I do have some questions, Mr. Mayor, and two questions in fact. I note the answer to my question regarding infrastructure for Bellerive to Solomons Cove ferry service. And as I understand it, the Hobart City deal is a joint federal, state and Clarence City Council undertaking. Can you please outline what role Clarence has in the development of the business case, and can Council update Alderman on progress of said business case?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Happy to answer that. At this stage, we're not involved in the development of the business case. As I understand things, that's been handled through the Department of State Growth, and it will be raised with the mayors and general managers as part of the city deal as that progresses through the course of this year.
Mr. Mayor, my second question is one around procedure. Just as a clarification here, I'm aware that in the state and federal parliaments, when a mover of a motion moves said motion, they then support that motion. Does that rule apply here?
There's no requirement for it to do so under the
Thank you for the
meeting
clarification.
procedures or regulations.
Thank you.
Mayor, culvert maintenance, we have many culverts in Clarence. Do we actually inspect them? Because I mean, I did have a ratepayer put that question to me, and Alderman Walker was talking about a culvert where the water's got to go uphill. So I'm just worried, do we actually do regular maintenance on those?
Graham?
Through Mr Mayor, I do understand that we do regular maintenance of our culverts, but I'll inquire with our depot and I'll follow up with the Alderman.
The second question was also from a ratepayer, and this is talking about a private contractor that's collecting rubbish from a private firm, and the complaint was by the ratepayer that they're coming about 2 a.m. to do it. What can we do to stop that, if that is the case? I mean, he's going to get more evidence, but he just wanted to know.
Mr. Tui, are you able to provide advice on...
I'll have to take that on notice because there may be some planning implications depending on this target site. Also, there are noise regulations under MCA that can be looked at. So I'd need to get those details from Alderman Peers.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Late last year, the 200,000 plus skate park in South Arnott's, now we got told today racing past 450,000, was scheduled to have an official opening that was abruptly cancelled. My question is, what were the costs incurred in doing the cancellation, and when is the scheduled official opening event likely to be occurring?
I'm not aware of any official opening event, but I'm not aware of any costs incurred in what's happened previously. Who can add?
Was an event scheduled for late last year, the official opening of the space.
Through you, Mr Mayor, there was a planned sort of opening or celebration of the skate park. That is usual when we have a major recreational asset opened. We usually acknowledge it and try and celebrate it with the community. The only expenses incurred in the lead up to that was staff time.
Second part about when we're likely to be rescheduling that opening?
At this stage, no consideration has been given to that, but if Council so wishes, I can relook at that.
The thinking was that until we had the sound report and actually Council made a decision on what course of action we're going to take, it would have been inappropriate to open the park before we'd finalise the project. Alderman Ewington.
I've said enough tonight.
Oh, thank you. Just answered my question.
Alderman Mulder.
Thanks, Mayor. On the 20th of January, Council received a confidential presentation on a shopping centre development. Has anyone heard updates about... Mr Mayor, can you explain the following social media post? Has anyone heard updates about the Coles development? My nan said there was a guest speaker at her Probus class, Mayor Doug Chipman, who said there will be a lot of development happening soon, with Coles days away from being finalised, and apparently also a McDonald's going.
Is that right?
Yes, I'm guilty, Your Honour. Let me say before I made that presentation to the Probus Club that I checked with the consultant, the proponent who actually came along and briefed us at the workshop, and asked him if there's any update and what was his intention in terms of public media. In other words, what could I say? And he was quite comfortable with me advising the Probus Club that it was in the mill and imminent, and that I was allowed to say that without compromising the project.
Mayor, would it not have been nice for you to have communicated that to the alderman whose job it is to consult with their communities rather than being ambushed? Because these were questions directed at me personally, and I'm not in a position to make any comment about those things. So
I accept that, but I haven't got any more information other than what I just said, is that and I believe there could be a public announcement later this week, but I don't have any more information than that at this stage.
Does that mean you can do what you did? It's not
Freestyle.
Look, what I've just released is released publicly, and so you're quite welcome to use what I just said. And the bottom line is that I'm optimistic about a public release coming out very soon.
Doesn't matter,
Okay. Any other questions?
Goodness gracious.
What I'm saying is there was an update on the confidentiality aspect of it, and I regret not passing it on to you.
Doesn't. We were told at the meeting not to say anything.
Oh, Mr Mayor, again, he's been warned.
Oh, now he's the mayor again.
Alderman James, Alderman Mulder's got the floor.
Sorry, yes.
I was on the floor and I appreciate that the two interjectors are interjecting each other as well as me, so I'm not too sure who gets it. But, my question relates to something that I have discussed with Mr Graham already, and that is I'm just wondering what the annual maintenance costs of the redeveloped school road.
Through Mr Mayor, I'm still following up on that item and I'll advise all the aldermen.
All right. In that case, I'd like to thank the members of the public for lasting the night. We do need to go into closed session. Thank you very much. If I could have a motion, please. Alderman Pearce, thank you. Seconder, Alderman Newington, thank you. Procedure, we go into closed session. All those in favour? Carried unanimously.